Percent to fractions and fractions to percent. Mr. Crampton, take 6.
Only 6.
Only 6 this time.
Only 6. Right, carrying on with our incredibly helpful maths videos that are just so thrilling to watch. They are amazing, aren't they? I know. So, percent to fraction, fraction to percent. This bit's pretty straightforward. This all fits in with the unit of work in year 6 that is going from fractions to decimals to percents, percents to decimals and decimals to fractions and decimals to percents and percents to decimals and decimals to fractions and fractions. You get the idea. Essentially, a fraction, a decimal and a percent are 3 different ways of saying the same thing. They are all saying that there is a part of something. It's all working out the bits in between whole numbers. So we're not working with integers now, we're working with the bits in between. If you've got something and a bit more but not the next whole. So they all convert and they all link together quite nicely, and you can change between them all quite easily. I think this is probably the hardest one, so we'll come to that in a second. This one, changing a percent to a fraction, is really straightforward. If we take the example of 58%, if you look at the percentage sign, it is actually a fraction tilted on its side. There's your numerator, there's your denominator, and here is your dividing line in between. Now, percent means of 100. So, if we put our line like we would, instead of for a percent like that, if we put it in like we would for a fraction, that little circle there is always going to be 100, because percent means of 100. And then whatever the percentage is, there is your numerator. Okay, so you simply write that number over 100. And the denominator here for a percentage will always be 100. However, mathematically, you wouldn't leave that fraction like that, because we can find a common factor of both of those numbers. Try and find a reasonably high one. You could start with 2 though, if you wanted to halve them both, because they're both divisible by 2. So you would end up with, what's half of 58? 29, we're simplifying it now, over 50. Now, I don't actually think you can simplify that anymore, because 29 is a prime number. Okay, so that's quite simply what you do. If you have a situation where for some strange reason you have more than 100%, you might do, sometimes it happens, you would just write an improper fraction. And then you would change that improper fraction to a mixed number. And then of course you would simplify that bit there to be 14 over 50, to be 7 over 25. So the mixed number would be 7, 1 and 7 over 25. It's a bit small. It says 1 and 7 over 25. Okay. So if you've got more than 100%, you would just write it as, you'd write an improper fraction first, and we've done this lots, change that into a mixed number. Right, that's quite straightforward. Fractions to percentages is a little bit harder going the other way. If you have a fraction in which it is quite straightforward to change the denominator to convert it into 100, if you can convert the denominator into 100, you have your percent. So I could change 10 into 100 by multiplying it by 10. And whatever I do to my denominator, I've also got to do to my numerator, so that the fraction is an equivalent fraction. So times that by 10, 60 over 100. And now you know now that if you've got 100, that is percent of 100, that is 60%. I think the hardest thing comes if you're trying to change a fraction to a percent where you can't convert the denominator into 100. For example, what if we had something like 3/7? Okay, well I know that 7 is not a factor of 100, so this is a slightly trickier way. There are a couple of different ways of doing it. What I'd recommend is converting that into a decimal, and then the decimal into a percentage. To find that as a decimal, we do 3 divided by 7. How many 7s are there in 3?
0.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. 0. Bit of crowd participation. 0. We've still got that 3 though. So this is where our decimal comes into it. This is how you change a fraction to a decimal, and then we'll do the percentage bit afterwards. So we add in a decimal place, carry the 3. Now we've got how many 7s? This might go on for a while, this one. We'll have to round it at some point. So 7 into 30.
4.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson.
With 2 left over.
Yes. This one might go on for lots of bad examples to choose. This one might go on a bit. So 7s into 20.
That's 2. And you have 6 left over.
Okay, so at this stage, you could keep going for a bit, but what I would do is, because we're trying to find a percent, if I have 6 left over, I would round that up to 3. Okay, so I'd use a bit of rounding in there and round up to 3. Otherwise, I could keep going on for a while, and I really only want 2 decimal places, and a bit of rounding is fine. So, as it's 6 left over, that is far more than half of 7, so we're going to round that up to 3. So I'm going to round it up to that, which, if you look at a previous video, you'll know that 0.43 as a percentage, you've got 43 hundredths, 4 tenths, 3 hundredths, 43 hundredths. So as a percent, that is simply 43%. A little bit of rounding up in that example, because some fractions, when you divide them, will keep going for a very long time. If you're trying to do a third, for example, you would need a very long piece of paper. So a bit of rounding up to 2 decimal places, rounding it down, whichever, gives you that percentage. So 3/7 as a percent is 43%. Okay, that's quite a tricky bit of maths, that bit. Most of the time with the work that you'll have to do, you'll be able to do this bit, convert the denominator into 100, like up here, and you can just work backwards, then that's the percentage. Okay, I think that's it for now. Thanks very much.